And we're live.
Look how
What's
good
up,
your
guys?
lighting and audio looks. It's amazing.
My lighting?
Yes, it's so good.
There's a certain time of the day where the natural light comes in, and this is it. Like, if I had to do one thing, I would film at 3:00 Pacific Standard every day in my studio. And because you can see actually in the reflection of my TV that I have the Dutch doors open.
Yeah.
And it just lets this natural light come in, and I look so much better. When it's like the normal like lighting in here, my face looks 10 pounds heavier. I look like an Oompa Loompa because I am kind of naturally really tan. So then I look like ridiculously tan, like in a bad way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
like,
natural
like fake tan.
I look like fake tan. Yes, I get where I look fake tan with the lighting in here. Studio lighting is awful on me. So I'm glad I really appreciate that you noticed that, Pace. Looks
those
like
those are the things I notice. And I have 8 sisters. And so I know that girls care about those kind of things.
Lighting and angles. So it looks like we've got some people joining us. And for those who don't know me, I'm Lauren Hardy. I'm with Wholesaling Inc. I coach all things virtual wholesaling, virtual investing. And we have Pace Morby. He is a Subto legend, creative finance expert. Super excited to have you.
Well, what's funny is I started out in wholesaling years ago. And I was a Homevestor franchise. Do you know any Homevestor franchises, like the We Buy Ugly Houses people?
Yeah, I know all about it.
Okay. It's like the most, like looking back on it, it's so funny because I felt like I had all the answers because I was part of a franchise,
Right.
And they teach you the opposite of virtual wholesaling. It's like go on every appointment. You are the center of your business. And so there's just this massive bottleneck where you can only do so many deals. And now I look back on that business model when I was making fun of people that were doing virtual, not making fun of, I was just in the back of my mind. I'm like, well, you're not buying deals as deep as I am. So I'm better than you and blah, 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 blah. Now I'm full virtual and I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Waste 2 years of my freaking life.
I know. I literally cringe when educators are like, get belly to belly, neck to neck with the seller. I'm like, what are you doing with the seller? Like, why are you in the seller's house? That is so creepy. Like, I'm a female. That is like dangerous for me. Like, I used to put my life on the line in this job when I used to go on seller appointments.
I agree 100%. And look, there are sellers that are like, look, I have no internet. I had this one seller 3 years ago. His name's Charles. We bought his house in Phoenix, but he lived in northern Colorado, like in the middle of nowhere on this massive 200-acre ranch. And he says, I've been trying to sell my house for 2 years. Nobody's man enough to come meet me belly to belly. And we were like, challenge accepted. So I jumped in my Prius. I drove all night, went up there, signed the contract, came back. We closed the deal like a week later. Other than those like weird, obscure stories. And then that was the other thing too, is people are like, well, why didn't you just send a mobile notary? Or why didn't you send somebody to go get the contract signed? And I'm like, I'm telling you, this guy tried to sell his house for 2 years. He was a good old boy. And he said, I want to shake hands and look the man in the ey who's going to buy this house.
Mm-hmm.
That is the only time I've ever ran into a need for a meeting with a seller.
Right. One time, like it's always there's an exception to every rule, with anything. And that's what I always say. There's always like an exception to the rule of like that one guy that just insisted on meeting the man that's going to buy the home. But for the most part, the amount of time that you spend driving, getting in your car, driving to the seller meeting, sitting there, piddling around with the seller in their house, petting their cat, building rapport, all that stuff, like driving back home, you're tired, you're cranky because you just sat in traffic all day. By the time you've done that, you made one offer that day. You've made one offer.
100%.
Where you could have made 10 offers on the phone to 10 other motivated sellers and probably locked up 3 contracts that day.
Well, here's the thing is like, I asked myself, why do people still do it that way? And this is kind of a strong statement. So I apologize for anybody that is like very offended easily, but I call it mental masturbation. basically what it is you are convincing yourself that you are staying busy by being in your car and driving to an appointment and I'm busy, I'm busy, I'm busy, I'm busy. And it's just like a total mental game you're playing with yourself and you're convincing yourself you're working hard.
Oh no, what happened? Oh wait, Pace, we're losing you.
I'm back. Sorry.
Oh, you're back. Okay. Yeah.
Jesse Burrell is trying to call me. So but anyway, my point is there's so many people in this business that stay busy to convince themselves that they're doing something when the reality is what you were just talking about, which is money producing activities is what you need to be doing all day long, making more offers, talking to more sellers, driving 45, especially where you're at. I know you don't invest in Southern California.
Right.
But if you did invest in Southern California, your average drive time is probably an hour.
Easily. When I was flipping homes here, easily. That's why I was virtual before virtual was even a word. Like, because I was like, no, I'm sorry. I'm not getting on the 405 at 3 o'clock. Like I wouldn't do it. I was like, instead, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to offer now over the phone. And then you tell me that you're going to accept it. And then I'm going to like build enough rapport where you'll feel bad if you don't accept it when we meet in person.
Yeah, so, I think also people believe that sellers want you to build rapport with them. And what I'm telling people just through experience, and you have a lot. Here's the thing is like when you're educating on a topic, you become the master of that topic because you talk about it so frequently. So I can't pretend to be a master of virtual wholesaling at all, but I can tell you, you'll completely attest to this. People think that sellers want you to build rapport with them. Sellers don't want you to build rapport with them. They want to do business with somebody who's credible. And so what I do is I tell my students like at Sub2, and I also tell my acquisition team, I go, guys, build rapport through building credibility. Don't build rapport by talking about cats and their favorite color and, you know, what's their favorite flavor of pie. It's a waste of time. And sellers know it's a waste of time, but they're being polite to you and listening to you, trying to scramble for things to talk about to build rapport. Just build rapport through building credibility. Get to the root of the problem and jump on it. You get way more done. Your life is way easier. So anyway, you obviously get it. You're the master of all this stuff. And it was a treat to get to know you when you came to Phoenix a little while ago.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there looking at your business. You're in Southern California, living a wonderful life. And you're investing it's Oklahoma City, right?
Yeah, Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And yeah.
What made you decide on those? What made you decide on those markets?
Well, my first virtual market was Nashville, Tennessee. And I was in Nashville for a few years. I started with building houses in Nashville. So that was actually my first virtual thing was I was just ground up construction. Because I started as a house flipper. I was a house flipper to start here in California, and then the deals were drying up. So I needed just something to work on because I needed to diversify. I basically didn't want all my eggs in one basket being like my California territory. So I bought some lots in Nashville and started building homes there. From there, it spun into, well, why don't I start like wholesaling these lots to other developers? Which then turned into, actually, there's a lot of hedge fund activity. Why don't I try wholesaling?
Did you know it was wholesaling lots at the time or no?
Oh yeah, no, I knew what wholesaling was because I'd done some wholesaling as it was. Like I'd done a little bit in California. Like I would wholesale the ones that I was like, didn't really want to do. I would wholesale those houses that I didn't want to flip myself, like the ones that seemed a little risky. But what happened was then, so it started with lots, and then it was like, well, actually there's a lot of hedge fund activity. Why don't I go after homes, just regular houses, and sell to the hedge funds and the other landlord type buyers? Let's look for landlords. But then what happened was Nashville was going through this like crazy development boom, and it became very saturated with just local investors. Like local investors were like, it was cutthroat. A seller could just walk out of their door and there was a construction site on every street. So they could just take my offer and then go and bid it against all the builders in the neighborhood. So I was getting constantly outbid. So I came up with a rule, and that's my course is all about, like my coaching program is all about all the struggles that I had. And then I came up with rules. And then now it's like, okay, so don't make the mistakes I made. So one of the mistakes was I picked this booming market that was in this interesting kind of like, it was like the number one real estate market at the time. Like, I don't recommend going virtual in a development type market like that. Another market would be similar, would be like in Austin, Texas. Like, it might be kind of difficult. And the house prices also started getting higher and higher and higher. So I wanted something that was more a lower price point home, more of a landlord market. I realized that the deals I really wanted to be doing were the landlord deals. Those are the easiest ones to do virtually because they're based off of rent versus like ARV minus repair. So I didn't have to think about as much about like the construction of the home. So it really started off, the first virtual was kind of picking a cool place that sounded cool, like Nashville, right? And like, oh, I built homes and just this is fun. Let's do this. No thought, right? After my experience with Nashville, I started putting some thought into it. And I was looking for like the 1% rule type rent to price ratio markets, like where the rent is 1% of the purchase price around there. I got a spreadsheet out. I started looking for, I wanted a population at the time. I wanted a population of 1 million because I didn't want to run out of marketing lists. Like, I wanted my marketing list to be big. I didn't want to keep running out and have list anxiety every month. So I just chose, I wanted a bigger metro, but I wanted the price point to be lower. And I got a spreadsheet out, picked some markets that looked interesting. Then, started deep diving. I happened to know someone in Oklahoma City at the time. So that was a little bit of a connection, like, oh, well, when we go there, I know so-and-so, they could help me out. So that's sort of how it came about. I mean, in my coaching program, I now have other parameters that I list and things. I've changed like my opinion on some stuff. But that's sort of how I ended up there. Long explanation.
No, it's actually one of the things I love about that is like the whole thought process of no thought process when you first chose Nashville is honestly one of the biggest indicators of a successful person, right? You just go, I'm going to go for it. And it might not be the perfect market and it might not be the perfect whatever, but you took action and you jumped, with both feet in. Right. You made some mistakes, you learned some lessons, and then you ultimately found out your niche, which is ultimately what you're doing right now in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. Right.
Yeah, I put no thought into it. And I mean, that's kind of like how I do most things. I just have like one speed, full speed. And so I'm going to do this and I just do it or whatever. But my problem is I don't quit fast enough. So like I will drag something on and on and on and like not quit. I'm very stubborn about quitting.
Well, that's legitimately like a really challenging thing for a lot of real estate investors, not just like the market, but think about, one of your students, they get a lead that comes through, right? And how do they know when to quit on that lead and when to push harder, right? Like those are the things that are really challenging that only a couple of years in the business, you could really determine those filters. And it's really a topic I think a lot of new investors are challenged with of like, when do I stop? When do I pivot? When do I do all that kind of stuff? And I imagine you teach a lot of that stuff based on your experiences from your Nashville days and now obviously in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's so funny. I had in some of my coaching calls, I do like a topic in the front of them. And one of my topics was, when do you quit? And I realized that there was no like rules. Like I never had an educator actually put clear rules of when you're allowed to quit on things. And so I picked like the top 3 things that I noticed people sort of either quit too fast, or they're not really sure, when should I quit on this? And I kind of can't off the top of my head remember, like one was, when do you quit a market? So I noticed that students try a market out when they go virtual. They try a market out for like maybe 2 months and they don't close a deal yet. They get frustrated. They think this market must not be a good virtual market. I'm going to quit and go to another virtual market. Then they try that market for 2 months and then they quit and they go to another one. And then they just say virtual doesn't work. And I say, well, no, it takes 6 months to figure out a market. Like it really does take 6 months. Like you can't just quit after 60 days. I mean, on average, like from when a seller lead comes in to when we get paid on that deal, our average is 97 days. So they are quitting before like my average of a person who's done this for 8 years. Like they're quitting already. They've already quit, so
that's a really, really good topic to talk about. I mean, so we recently jumped into Orlando. And I shouldn't say jumped into, we're like 4 or 5 months into it. But now we're collecting really, really good data based on our ad spend. So like, my bookkeeper is the same bookkeeper as Tom Kroll, same exact bookkeeper. Tony is her name. And so she comes back and she's telling me, hey, this is what, if you guys spend $1, you get $10 back. So if you're spending $1 in Orlando in marketing, your revenue is 10x. And I'm like, okay, we're never quitting this market. Let's double down on our marketing, right? So it took us honestly 4 months to even figure out that KPI, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you can't just spend $1,000 in your first month and have any real good data. It does take minimum for I would say 6 months. Is you're right. That's 100% right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. So I mean, I know you're like interested in all things virtual, but I want to talk all things subject to. So I have always wondered, I don't have a lot of creative finance experience. I'll be honest. I have made creative finance offers to sellers and I can't seem to convince the seller to take terms. Like, I don't know what to say. I don't know how you say it to make it appealing to them. They have these obvious, kind of rebuttals or, objections. I don't know how to overcome the objections. And part of why I can do wholesaling like what I do virtually is because I'm really good at overcoming objections over the phone. And I can do it well enough that I can do it over the phone and they don't need to be Billy to Billy with me. And that's how I can do it. But with Sub2, like I can't even do that in person. So I'm curious, like how do we do Sub2 virtually? Because I would love to do that. How do you convince a seller to take terms? If there was one thing I want to focus on, because I love getting micro on topics that my whoever I'm speaking with is like an expert on, and this particularly interests me, is how the heck do you get a seller to say, sure, I'll let you take my mortgage on? Yeah.
So I'm going to answer that question with a question, and then I'll jump into like answering it long-winded.
Okay.
Am I breaking up at all?
No.
Oh, awesome. Oh my gosh. I'm so lucky. So, this is what's so funny, right? So most of the time wholesalers are the ones that ask me the question of like, wait, how are you doing this? And I go, you're a wholesaler. You're convincing the seller to sell their property at sometimes 50 and 60 cents on the dollar. So let me ask you a question. How in the hell are you convincing a seller to sell at 50 cents, 60 cents on the dollar? Because as a creative finance investor, I'm sometimes I'm buying Sub2 50, 60 cents on the dollar, but I'm coming up sometimes 90 and 95 cents on the dollar in creative finance situations. So number one, I'm dominating the price point. Like I'm giving the seller way more money than you ever have the ability to do as just a single wholesaler. So right out of the gate, I'm coming in and pointing that out. So one of the things I love doing is I probably average 10 hours a week that I personally call my student sellers. And the reason being is because I feel like it's somewhat of a blue ocean in the sense of like wholesale is so, not virtual wholesale, but wholesale in general has been around for a long time. And so there's a lot of people with like seller calls and, stuff on YouTube that you can hear the way the conversation goes. I have never heard somebody on YouTube or otherwise calling sellers with creative finance. So Sub2, seller finance, novation agreements. We can jump into all three of those. So I love recording on Zoom. Anytime a seller's like, I'm having these objections with the seller, I go, great. Let's set up a call in 2 days. 40 of my students will fill in like a Google Calendar, or not a Google Calendar, a Google Sheet. They'll fill in like 15-minute calls back to back to back to back. And I'll just hammer those out for like 4 or 5 hours. And I'll do that once a week. And then I'll do it a couple times incrementally throughout the week as well. And that's all I do is I get on the phone, I record these via Zoom. So what I'll do for you and your audience, and maybe some of your students that are like, hey, I love Lauren and I love her program. But I do run into people with like low equity, or I run into people that simply want too much money for their house. I'll give you like 2 hours of me recorded. Like you'll see my face, you'll see my mannerisms, you'll see everything and how I overcome their objections. And then we can jump, like right now, I'll jump into the top 5 objections you get with the seller and what to say. But first and foremost, the way I'm doing it is I'm paying way more than you guys are. Way more.
Right. Okay. Okay. So you focus heavy on the price.
Right. So how many times have you talked to a seller that owes, let's say 150, they owe 150 and you're like, yo, my best cash price is like 130. If I paid 150, I'd lose money.
Right. Right.
Either on a fix and flip or even a wholesale. You're like, I can't come up to that number. Well, sorry, that's what I owe. So unfortunately for that seller, dozens and dozens of other wholesalers or real estate investors have tried to buy that house at 130 as well. So when I come along and I say, well, I'd be willing to do 150. Well, actually, that's not what I say. I say, if I come up to 150, would you be willing to give me terms? And then the seller has no idea what that means.
Right. Not a clue.
Right.
Right.
So I always, for anybody that's watching, I don't, if does anybody, like anybody's watching right now, if you're one of my students, throw up a peace sign or throw up, Sub2 or whatever, say something in the comments. But my students know my F-150 story, like back and forth. Do you know my F-150 story, Lauren?
I know the truck story. I know the truck story because I've heard it before.
Love it.
There's a truck story, I feel like, and I've heard this truck story. Something about selling a truck on terms.
Yeah. So when a seller says, well, what's terms? Because I always throw out like an ambiguous word that's not too big, right? I'm not going to pull out creative finance or subject to or seller finance. I'm not going to bring up any of that stuff because that just goes. But if I say terms, it's a small word that's not too intrusive. And the seller always says, well, what does that mean? So then I always tell them in a story form. I just say, hopefully you guys don't mind if I tell the F-150 story real quick.
Yeah.
But I used to be a contractor. So I literally tell my sellers this exact story, and it is a very true story. The story is this. I used to be a contractor, and I had this F-150. It's a Ford truck that I loved. I used it for work. My company made plenty of money by utilizing that truck. But there came a point where we had like 300,000 miles on that truck. It was time to sell it. So I go on Kelley Blue Book. I find out that the truck is only worth $5,000. So what does that mean? If I go on Craigslist and I post it for $5,000, am I selling that for $5,000? No, I'm going to sell it for $4,200 because people are going to work me down, right?
Right.
So what I did is I was belligerent, just like most of our sellers. And they're like, yeah, I know what Zillow says. And I know what people say the house is worth, but I'll only sell it for this, right? They get emotionally attached to a number. And so I just said, screw it. I'm just going to put on Craigslist for $10,000. Okay. Well, do you think I got a call at all? No. And by the way, Lauren, I'm telling the story word for word the way I tell this story to sellers. Like I'm literally telling a seller this exact story. So I go, what I do is I tell the seller, well, let me tell you what terms are. And then I jump into the story. And now here we are in the story. So after 3 months, I didn't get an offer on that $10,000. Obviously, it's not what the truck is worth. And my wife comes to me and she's like, sweetheart, I love you, but you got to get that truck out of our freaking driveway. And I'm like, sweetheart, it's worth way more to me and my company than the $5,000 that I could sell it for. And she's like, then why don't you take payments on it? I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so genius. So I go back to Craigslist. Yeah, my wife steps in. She's the smart one. So she's simply, I do one thing. I change one thing. The one thing I changed was I go back to the ad and I said, Ford F-150 will take payments. Did I sell that truck for $10,000? No. I sold that truck for $12,500 because I was willing to take payments on it and give somebody else the value of getting into it so that they could take that truck and go produce money for their family. And so I ended up selling it to a gentleman who owned a painting company. And he said, you know what, for me, it's not about the payment. It's about the fact that I can take this truck and go make $6,000 or $7,000 a month for my family. And ultimately, I gave them payment options, and I collected interest. So over the course of, I think it was like 2.5, 3 years, I ended up selling that truck for about $15,000 when you add the interest in. So 3 times what the house is worth. So, Mr. Seller, what terms means is that essentially, if you're willing to finance the home to me, I'd be willing to make payments to you so that we can work out a price that fits what your goal is. That's all terms is. And they're like, wow, that's it. And I go, that's it. You name your price, I name my terms, and we move forward and we enter into a contract. So when I figured this out, so I went to coaching, I paid all sorts of people. I was traveling the country trying to learn creative finance because like I said, I was a HomeVestor franchise owner, right?
Right.
And our cost per lead towards the end of my stint as a home investor, my cost per lead was about $1,400 per call, not per lead, like not per like quality lead, not per
Yeah.
contract. My cost was
That's crazy.
$1,400 for a phone call. So I would basically give home investors $20,000 of my money every month.
Oh my God.
I didn't start with 20,000. I started with like $5,000 and then I worked my way up. But ultimately towards the end, I was at 20 grand. And for 20 grand, I get like 12, 13 phone calls for the month for $20,000 in advertising. That's no joke. So when you divide how many phone calls I received into the $20,000 ad spend, my cost of a lead was $1,400.
Dang.
So this is why I was forced to get creative. I had these leads coming in, and these leads were like, yeah, I want $200,000 for a house that is worth $200,000. And I'm like, I can't do that. Okay, well, I'll sell it through a real estate agent. Finally, I met a few people. I paid for some coaching. I traveled the country and like met with a bunch of people doing this. And I spent a lot of time and a lot of energy perfecting this craft. What I started doing is I started buying those houses that people were like, well, if we can't get 200,000, we're just going to sell it on the open market. And I would say, okay, well, you own the house free and clear. So why don't you just be the bank for me? And they're like, yeah, we don't need the money. We just care more about the price. The other thing too is like, if a seller sells their house today for $200,000 and it's worth $200,000, I can go in and I can get 2% interest. A lot of times I'm getting 0% interest. I just closed today on a deal in Yuma, 0% interest home, like getting free houses all over the place. And the reason being is because the seller is married to one goal. The seller is married to the goal of getting a purchase price reached, right? So I just go, am I paying over retail? No, I'm not paying over retail, but sometimes I'm paying 80, 90, 95 cents on the dollar, but I'm getting terms where I'm putting sometimes no money down, sometimes very little money down, sometimes a good amount of money down. But what I'm doing is I'm turning around and finding a family to move into the property that gives me the money down. So I get into the ownership as that's a little bit tricky. We can get into that a little bit later, but ultimately, I got to a point with home investors that I was buying about 15 to 17 rentals a month.
Wow.
A month. So I was buying subject to and seller finance, all utilizing these leads. And I was like I was spending more money in ad spend. And then I started running into issues with home investors corporate. And they were saying, this is not, we are a fix and flip and wholesale operation. And why did they care? They care because they make a royalty on my money. And if I'm buying rentals and there's no like monetization right out of the gate and I'm building this massive cash flow,
right,
they can't monetize.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So ultimately, after months of doing that, I decided I'm going to sell my franchise. And so I sold my franchise a little over 2 years ago, and I went out on my own. And we've bought hundreds of homes subject to. We've bought hundreds of homes seller finance. Some of the time we're wholesaling those. So I'd say 50% of the houses I get subject to and seller finance, I'm just simply wholesaling those. So a lot of people say, well, I don't want to get into Sub2 because I want to learn wholesale. And I'm like, I wholesale more than most wholesalers do, but I wholesale a lot of creative finance stuff.
So you wholesale it to another landlord that then will take on those payments and that payment plan and all that?
I wholesale it to a wide variety of people. So let's talk about like pre-COVID. Let's talk about this statistic. This is a really interesting statistic. If 100 people go down to like Bank of America or Chase or Wells Fargo and they say, hey, I want to get a mortgage for a home, right? I want to go buy this home. 100 people walk into a bank and 100 people walk out. How many of those people have obtained a mortgage, like gotten approval for a mortgage?
Right. I see where you're going. I see where you're going.
Pre-COVID, right. So pre-COVID, it was 60% of people would get approved for a mortgage.
Right.
Now, during COVID, all these lenders have tightened the guidelines, and now it's more like 45 to 47% of people right now are getting approved. So more people get declined for a mortgage than get approved. So think about that. In my market, 9,000 homes are purchased traditionally every single month. So what do you think the demand is for non-traditional buyers who are like, yo, I've got cash.
Right.
Like I've got 20, 30,000 in cash, but I got declined because I only have 1 year job history, or I got declined because
Self-employed.
Self-employed. Oh my gosh, self-employed. So that's why me, all my partners, everybody I know, we all own our houses subject to.
Seriously. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's so that
game
is
changer.
such a game changer. Okay. So you're actually now, does your coaching program go into your disposition strategies, like all the different ways that
Oh
you
my
can?
gosh. Yes.
Right.
If you talk to one of my students will tell you Pace's program is like worth $100,000. I teach because I'm a wholesaler too. So I teach wholesale. I teach fix and flip because I do a lot of fix and flip. I teach subject to, I teach seller finance. I teach novation agreements, which we can touch on what a novation agreement is. And then I teach raising private capital. I teach dispositions. I teach all the legalities. And then my transaction coordinator helps my students transact do all their transactions. My sales team helps out. I help them close their deals. Like our mentorship goes through everything that my business is.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I mean, you definitely like explain just in this call for me, like how to have that conversation with a seller in a way that I feel like I can regurgitate that now better. Because I've taken training in seller financing years ago, and I could never really articulate it to a seller in a way that the seller understands it.
Right.
Now, one thing I will say is it's hard. It is harder probably in the higher price markets. Like,
No.
do you think
I've got a deal right now in Vallejo, California.
Okay.
I have a buyer bringing $150,000 as a down payment on the house.
Okay.
And my down payment to the seller is $90,000. We're collecting $60,000 as a fee in a high price market. The home's like a $950,000 house.
Okay.
So here's the thing. The high price market only makes it easier because think about it. Who is that? It's doctors, lawyers, it's business owners, people like you and me who are making really good money, but can't go out and get approved. Like my goal in life is to make, I'm not making this now, but my goal in life is to make $20 million a year and have the IRS think I'm making zero, right? That's like the ultimate goal. So if you're going to do that and you're going to try and write everything off and you're going to try and like keep your money to yourself as much as humanly possible, you're not going to get approved for a mortgage. So you've got doctors, lawyers, attorneys, like all these people that are trying to be really smart with their taxes that are writing everything off, but they've got tons of cash. So in the higher price point markets, typically my buyers, the people I dispo to, those people are coming in with significant deposits.
No, I agree with you there. I'm talking about how do you convince a California seller who's got this house that, you know, they have a mortgage of $750,000 and the house is maybe worth $850,000. So you're like, listen, I'll give you $850,000, but I need to take over your $750,000 mortgage. And they're looking at me going, well, listen, I want to buy another home someday. So now my name's going to be tied to this mortgage still. Like, can you, what is that scenario? Like, because
yes, I love it. So think about it. When you go to get another mortgage, wouldn't you much rather have an existing performing mortgage on your credit right now when you go get another one rather than have none?
I mean, but doesn't that make it difficult for them to get another loan?
Absolutely not. Let me tell you a story about my own personal house. So I get a referral because everybody in Phoenix knows me as the creative finance guy, right? So I get this real estate agent that calls me. And she's like, it's like 5 months deep into her listing. And she's like, hey, I took on a listing. I feel like I overpromised a little bit. And I know you're the creative guy. I've seen the emails. I've seen you on Instagram. What can you do to help me? And I said, look, here's the unfortunate thing. If I buy the property from you, I got to pay you a 3% commission on a house that you can't even sell. I'm not really interested in working with you unless you're willing to work on my fee. And I'll give you a flat fee, like a finder's fee of $2,500, but I'm not going to pay you $9,000. Actually, it was a $400,000 house. I'm not going to pay you $12,000 on a house you're about to lose the listing on because your listing agreement ends in 30 days. Mm-hmm. And she's like, she was a little bit upset. So she like, you know, we get off the phone and 2 weeks later, she calls me. She goes, okay, I'm ready to work with you. I go, great. Now what I want you to do is I'll pay you $2,500, but I want direct access to your seller. I don't want to have anything to do with you. She's like, that's impossible. I go, great. I'll just call your seller after your listing agreement ends and I'll just work with them directly. But I am not working with a real estate agent as my mouthpiece.
Right.
Unfortunately for you guys, is you guys screw up every possible deal. It's almost like day one in real estate school. You guys learn how to blow up every single deal. So I'm not interested in working through you, but I'm definitely interested in working for you, and I can get this deal done. So let me just talk to your seller. In fact, this logo, which is my brand logo, this logo came from this individual seller. So I'll tell you the story real quick. So she relents and she says, okay, great. As long as you pay me $2,500, I will give you access to the seller. And I go, great. And I don't want you involved at all. I don't want you trying to coordinate. I don't want you trying to do anything. You will destroy my deal. Okay, great. And I go, well, here's what I'll do. I'll tell you how I did it and what I did after I close escrow so that you don't start saying stuff like, well, I don't know what that means. So she completely removed herself. I called Dave, the seller. And this is where I'm going to answer your question about the DTI or debt to income ratio. So somebody's ability to go get another mortgage when they already have an existing mortgage.
Right.
So I get on the phone with Dave. I explained to him subject to, and I said, hey man, I got your agent out of the way and here's why, blah, 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 blah. This is what I do for a living. I'm known as this guy. And he goes, I love it. But that causes a major problem for me is that I can't go buy another house if I don't sell this one.
Right.
And I go, Dave, that's so far from true. It's painful to hear that. And he goes, no, I know this. I'm currently, Pace, I'm currently in the process of buying a brand new home 7 months ago. I think it was like 6-7 months ago before I talked to him. He had been driving home. He sees a brand new home community. He drives in there and they sucker him into putting a $20,000 non-refundable deposit on this brand new piece of dirt. So he goes home and he tells his wife, baby, we got to sell our house. I got a brand new house. We're going to start building, blah, blah, blah. His wife's like, yes, this is amazing. Let me call my cousin who ended up being the real estate agent. So the lender for the brand new home approved him with the contingency that he sold his existing home, not rent it out, not do anything with it. The lender flat out told him, I can approve you, but you need to remove the other home from your credit because your DTI or your debt to income ratio is off. So here we are 5.5 months later. They're like biting their fingernails because now the house is almost done being built. The lender's telling them, hey, if that house is not sold and off your hands in 30 days, you lose your $20,000 deposit and you lose the rights to this house. Right?
Right.
So the real estate agent, I remove her. I get on the phone with Dave. Dave and I work out a deal. And I said, here's what I'll do, Dave. I'll give you a non-refundable deposit of $5,000. And if I can't get you approved for your other mortgage, I will let you have that $5,000 and we'll sever ties and you can keep my $5,000. He's like, you're that confident? I go, bro, I've been doing it for years. I'm that confident. So I simply get on the phone. I work out a deal where I simply take over his mortgage. Didn't give Dave any money. I took over his house and my wife at the time was my transaction coordinator. So she ran over, signed the documents with Dave because his wife, they were having an issue with their internet. So my wife runs over, she falls in love with the house.
Okay.
And my wife's like, I want to buy this house for ourselves. So that's why I ended up buying it for ourselves. We ended up moving into it. But this is what I did. During escrow, we opened escrow. During escrow, I called the lender and I said, hey, my name is Pace. I buy houses subject to constantly. And I'm currently buying Dave's house subject to, which means I'm going to be taking over the payments, but we're going to keep the mortgage in his name. Now, I utilize a third-party servicing company to handle those payments so that you guys can track that those payments are not being paid for by Dave. They're not coming out of his income. And she goes, oh, yeah, that's not a problem. If that's the case, for the first 12 months that somebody else is making the payments, we take 75% of the DTI, 75% of the payment off of his DTI. And then after a 12-month stint of recorded documented payments, we will take 100% of that off of his DTI. So that is the process. The new lender nationwide, not that lender, not my lenders, not people I know, every single lender will remove 75% of the payment immediately by showing that those payments are not responsible by Dave.
Oh, so so let's put this in layman, terms for us that don't, for those who don't understand all the things Pace just said. You called Dave's lender that Dave was trying to get a loan with, and you expressed to them, I am going to take over his loan. I am going to use a mortgage servicing company. And this is common with lenders, like that they will take off 75%. I've never heard of this before. Like that's a thing. That really is a thing.
Yeah, think about it. Think about people that have a portfolio where they go out and use their own personal name to go out and get loans on rental properties.
Right.
They're not doing that because they have massive amounts of income. They're doing it because they're documenting with their lender that their renter is making the payment, not them.
Right. Right.
It's highly common. Every single buy and hold investor that is buying and utilizing their name for their first 15 purchases, because there is a cap. You can't just continue to go out and buy an unlimited amount of conventional. You can't get get conventional loans unlimited. It does cap you. But for the first 15, these guys, all they're doing is going to the bank and saying, "Hey, here's proof that I have, this is a seasoned rental property." Right. And getting seasoning in it, and they remove the payment from the DTI.
Right. So that's what I always thought is like, it has to be a seasoned tenant. And I had a lender tell me the tenant, it was like, had to be seasoned for like 2 years. And I was like, 2 years? Like, so then,
here's the technicality behind it. It's 2 months. So all I did is I made 2 months up front for Dave's payments. I set it up with West Star Servicing, which is who my servicing company is. I make 2 payments ahead of time. I was going to make those payments anyway. I make 2 payments ahead of time. We have West Star send the information over to his underwriter for his loan company or his mortgage company, and they get the deal done. This is something that is done daily, weekly, monthly with my students. They run into sellers exactly the same exact situation. Yeah. And then I've taken Dave's testimonial where he was like, "Look, I thought this guy Pace was full of crap. Then he puts his money where his mouth is. Then he walks me through the process. Then he calls my lender on my behalf. He gets the deal done. This guy's the truth. This guy's amazing." So when I have students that are like, "Hey, my seller doesn't believe this is that easy," I go, "Have him call Dave." And my seller Dave has gotten on the phone with a lot of my student sellers saying, "No, this is real. I'm living in my brand new built home. I couldn't have qualified without what Pace did. This was the best thing that ever happened to us." And the guy actually one night, he sends me a text late at night, like maybe 1 a.m. actually. And he's like, "We're just laying in bed in our brand new house, and I can't thank you guys enough. And I go, "Isn't it amazing what creative financing can do?" And he replies back with simply Sub2 with the peace sign. And I go, "That's my new logo."
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
That is really cool. That is, and I have to say, because again, I've taken courses in Subto. I've taken all sorts of courses. All right. Like over 8 years, I feel like I've done it all as far as education goes. And I have a niche, and you have your niche. I have got my niche. And I can tell like you did take your time to deep dive into the niche of Sub2 and how to explain it to a seller. So the seller, like you perfected your script, and that's why you can coach on this, because you took that time of like intense research, perfecting and honing your craft. I have had other educators explain this entire process that you explained, but they leave out huge holes.
Can I tell you the honest reason behind that?
Why is it? Because the hole, can I just say what the hole was here? Is what I was asking you. I was like, well, what about the DTI? The educator leaves that out.
Right, because you know why? Because they're not practitioners of what they teach. Now, here's the thing. I paid one guy here in Phoenix, $50,000, and when I was asking those questions to him years ago, it was like he's skirting the questions, he's pushing it under the rug. I couldn't get the answers, so I ended up hiring real estate attorneys that were were proficient in Subto all over the country. I have 5 of them that I employ. And these guys are like, "Oh yeah, this is how it's done. This is how it's done. This is how some of my other clients do it." And I had to piece it together by paying attorneys to tell me how it's actually done behind the scenes.
That is, I agree with you. I know that there's a lot of educators that are not practitioners, and same with, kind of what I teach and everything.
So many.
And I think that that's just what I got my hands on, and that's why I'm asking you. I don't mean to sound skeptical, but you can see that I've done courses and I'm like, well, what about that? Because I tried it and then the seller says this, and then I don't know what to say, and then I go back to the course, and the course, it's empty, big hole. Like, and you're right, and you can tell you're the real deal. You do this so you have overcame those objections. And
there's so many more objections. I'd love to get into them too. So like, think about one of the, this is what I tell sellers. This is also like, going back to our beginning of our conversation, it was build rapport by building credibility. So what I do with my sellers, I say, when I go through my pitch on Sub2 or seller finance or novation agreements, I'll say, can I tell you the questions you're not asking? Can I tell you the other questions that other sellers have asked me that you really need to understand? And they're like, of course, right? Of course. Yes. And I go, okay. So Timmy, the seller, let me ask you a question. What happens if I buy your property subject to? What happens if I buy this house subject to, and then I get abducted by aliens? I can't make the payment because I'm not even on this planet anymore. What happens?
I don't know. What's happening?
Right? Like, right. So what I do, and what I write in all of my agreements is I write into all my agreements a performance deed that requires me to perform on what I promised. If I don't perform, my performance deed can be executed by a servicing company, which means the servicing company handles the transaction, which means I don't make the payment to the mortgage company. I make my payment to a servicing company that I set up. The servicing company then makes the payment to the mortgage company. Okay. And then if I ever fall behind 30 days, let's say I'm behind 30 days, the seller simply calls the servicing company and says, I want my house back. And it gets deeded back to the seller within a 5-minute phone call.
That right there should overcome a lot of objections because they don't have 100%. To go through the foreclosure process. Because that was always the thing sellers would say is, I don't want to have to go and foreclose on you. That's a big, long process. And, so yeah, I didn't know that's a thing. I didn't know that was a thing you can do, that you can make that decision to do it.
There's not a lot of people. Nobody taught me how to do that. That came from one of my attorneys. He's like, oh yeah, well, you can draft a document to overcome basically any objection. And so we drafted a document and we named it a performance deed. And then there's certain states that performance deeds are not legal. And so what you can do is you can pre-sign a deed in lieu of foreclosure. So you know what a deed in lieu of foreclosure is. So I can pre-sign a deed in lieu of foreclosure that states, instead of you foreclosing on me, I'm already signing my rights to this property away if I don't perform. So essentially, I'm still drafting a performance deed, but it's called a deed in lieu of foreclosure. Like Florida is a state that you can't do a performance deed. Okay. But you can pre-sign a deed in lieu of foreclosure. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, no, that does. Question, where can you find an attorney that is skilled in Sub2 for anybody who's listening and say they need an attorney in their state?
So my main attorney, his name is Sean St. Clair. And he's in Arizona, but he's also licensed in Atlanta. So he does like closing. He's a closing attorney in Atlanta. Okay. And then I have a handful of other attorneys that are like document drafters, a couple of them in Texas. And then I also have a specialized attorney in Texas that specializes in lease options, because people think that lease options are not available or not allowed in Texas, which is incorrect. So I have those 5 attorneys. Have your people DM me, and wherever they're at, I'll give them my attorney. Like Sean St. Clair wouldn't be good for California, right? I have other attorneys good for California. So have your people DM me, or maybe they'll email you, whoever actually wants that. Have them email you, and I'll give you a list of my attorneys. But like, for example, this is the cool stuff I do inside my mentorship. Like, I love doing this, and I know you do too. Like hearing from I actually have a couple students that are also in your program.
Oh, cool.
And so my students talk about how amazing your program is and how much they love you. But like, I love doing this. I know you do too. One of the things I do is typically every week, I bring in a special guest. So a couple of weeks ago, I brought in Sean St. Clair, who's my attorney. He's the guy who drafted all my Sub2 seller finance, novation agreements, wholesale agreements. Like, he's the guy that's drafted all my documents. So I'll bring him in once a month, maybe once every quarter, and he'll just go through any document people want. We'll record it on Zoom. We'll go line by line by line, why he drafted it this way, how to overcome objections with sellers, why this is important for the seller to have for their protection, blah, 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 blah. Did I lose you?
You're
I'm
back. You're back.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, with like the attorney stuff, I have like realized, I've realized, and I wish I realized this in my 20s, attorneys are just regular ass people too. And so I was so afraid of attorneys, but now like these attorneys become my friends. And so now when I need something, I call them up and I go, hey, I need a new document. I need a new this, or I need a new that. So if your people need a document, let me know and I'll help them out with whatever they need.
Oh man, I appreciate that. Well,
yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much. I feel like this was gold. Like you gave off some serious gold. So thank you.
Dude, are you kidding me? Like so tell your people, like if anybody reaches out to you later and says, hey, I want to know more about this. I have a free Facebook group. It's called Creative Finance with Pace Morby. And about 2 months ago, I did a 16-hour live where I called sellers. I answered questions all about creative financing for 16 straight hours. And then last month, I did another live for 25 hours where I talked about creative financing and how to get into this business. And it's all free content. So I totally get like coaching is not for everybody. And I don't really promote my coaching, but if people want to learn more about it and they don't have the time to invest in another coaching program, or they might not have the money, go to my Creative Finance Facebook group and go find those 16-hour and 25-hour lives. I go through A to Z. And then I also get sellers on the phone. We close deals on those lives. I walk sellers through objections. I structure deals. I'm on whiteboards. So anything you guys want to learn, what I can say is if you guys are in Lauren's program, you're going to take what she's teaching you and you can probably double your conversion rate with your existing lead flow by picking out the sellers who that want too much money or simply have no equity in their property.
Right. Now I have a question. Do you actually ever look for that type of seller specifically? So like when you're pulling a marketing list, instead of pulling say a absentee owner list or I'm sorry, like an owner occupant list that has a lot of equity. Instead, do you ever do an owner occupant list that does not have any equity and market to those people? Do you specifically market to these type of people where this would work or no?
Honestly, no. I tell people, here's the thing is like, I'm a wholesaler at heart in the sense that we love wholesale, right? I wholesale Sub2, I wholesale regular, cash transactions, but ultimately I don't market for wholesale and I don't market for Sub2 or creative finance. And I don't market for fix and flip. I simply market to motivated sellers, and whatever that seller needs, I put them in the bucket that I can solve their problem. So now if somebody says, look, I only want to buy Sub2s and creative finance, there are very specific lists you can go after that Sub2 is just like involved in. So number one, foreclosure. Foreclosure is like the number one way. If you want to acquire, get a rental portfolio and within 6 months, never have to work another day in your life. Like that's literally the easiest way to do is foreclosures. Then number two, expired listings. So people who already have existing pain, why did they fail their listing? Either A, they don't have equity, which is ding, 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 or B, they have so much equity, but they're like, I'm hell-bent on getting a specific number. So here's a deal I closed the other day. Here I am talking about Sub2. Lauren, I buy a lot of seller finance deals at 0% finance too. No joke. Like it's one of my biggest acquisition strategies. So I get sellers that are like, I'm a tired landlord. I'm done with this property and I want 150.
Right.
I'm like, great. I'll pay you 160 if you give me 0% financing.
Right. Because they're used to making payments or getting payments, being a landlord.
Right. I tell them I'm upgrading you from being a landlord to being a lender. You are now the bank. And that is like the magic line that gets them like their hearts melt. And they're just like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I would love to be the lender. I'm sick of being the landlord. So we take over the property. Last one I closed, 0% seller finance. We contracted one a couple weeks ago, but the last one I closed is about a month ago. And it was a seller who was getting offers from wholesalers of like 80, 90,000. She wanted 120. And I said, I'll give you 120 if you're willing to give me 0% financing. And she says, no, why the hell would I give you 0% financing? I'll give you 8% financing with a $20,000 deposit. And I go, how about I pay you 140 with a $2,500 deposit at 0% financing, and essentially just build in all your equity or build in all your interest up front.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, oh my gosh, I like that. And I go, why wouldn't you? I mean, at the end of the day, what happens if I sell the property in 2 or 3 years and you were the lender getting an 8% return for like 2 or 3 years, but then I sell the property and no longer you don't get a return anymore?
That's true.
If I pre-build all your interest into the deal and then you give me 0% finance, if I go sell the property in 2 or 3 years, you've already made all your money. And she's like, oh my gosh, I love this. I go, great. So here's the reality. The reality is I saved myself probably a good $150,000 on interest because I didn't give her 8% worth of interest built into the price. I gave her like 2 years of interest into the price, and she's going to carry that term for me for like 20 years until it's paid off.
Yeah.
Think about it, right? We go buy a house. If I go down and I buy a house for my family for $300,000 at 3% interest, over the course of 30 years, I'm probably paying $750,000 for that house. So what I did is I paid this lady 20 grand over retail, but I bought it for 0% finance. And now when I receive my payment of $1,200 from my renter, and then I turn around and give her a payment of $500, I cash flow $700, but my mortgage to her pays down $500 every single freaking month.
Mm-hmm.
There's no interest. So these are the things that I teach people. And these are the things that I'm just like, wow, if everybody knew this, you could build your portfolio in less than 2 years and get to a point where literally, like, check this out. Here's my Airstream. I don't know if you can even see it.
Yeah, I see it. I love it.
But get to a point where literally you could turn your entire business off. I'm not at that point in the sense that, like, yes, I cash flow and I could support my like the living and all that kind of stuff, but it's not motivating for me enough. I want to get to a point where I'm like $400,000 a month in cash flow. I'm nowhere near that. So right now I'm at a point within, a couple of years of doing this full time. I was a contractor for 10 years. So I had 160 employees. And then I was a wholesaler for the last 3 years of me being a contractor. I was doing both of them at the same time. And then I left that and I've been doing this full time, not that long, but within that time frame, the cash flow on these properties is like $400, $400. You don't need that many of them to completely quit doing whatever else you're doing.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. And I have to say, I was talking to Tom Kroll at one point and he brought up, if there's one person who's like the best at explaining Sub2, it's Pace Morby. He was just giving examples of coaches that are really good at teaching something that's complicated. And now I'm like, and I know what he's talking about. Like, you are amazing at explaining it. You've came up with, every objection. I mean, again, I said it already, but you've really honed the craft. And everything that sellers say. It's almost like you've written every objection down. And then you're like, if they say this, I'll say that. If they say this, I'll say that. I would probably pay like $25,000 for that on a Word document. Like, if you could just look me up, I will write a check on a Word document because I know all the other nuts and bolts. Okay. Like, I get that. I know all the nuts and bolts and like, a couple things like, the deed in lieu, like, I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have thought about that, but you know what? Cool. But it's like, it's those rebuttals that is gold, that's what the coach like you is for. And there's a lot of money like I would pay for those rebuttals.
Well, here's the reality of like where this world is headed. The world is headed to a virtual world. This whole COVID thing couldn't have been better for people that are learning from you. Like, I'm just looking for the silver lining in like the worst pandemic of like 100 years. But the silver lining is like, if you're running your business virtually now, like, oh my gosh, you are doing just fine. It's the people like the Home Investor franchises. It's the people that were doing belly to belly that are really struggling right now. And so all I can like say if my audience is watching, I'm not sure if the broadcast worked properly or whatever, but if my audience is watching, guys, virtual wholesaling and virtual fixing and flip. I wouldn't say so much virtual fixing and flipping is like a target, but virtual wholesaling and virtual building your portfolio. Oh my gosh. Like the laptop lifestyle is 100%.
Yeah.
And you're living it. It is so cool. Like, you're in Newport. Your office is in Newport. You got this dope ass location and you've got a team investing in Oklahoma City. That is living the dream.
Yeah. Well, now I'm like, do I need an Airstream? Like,
You need an Airstream.
I don't really like I don't like camping. I don't like it. Like I don't like getting dirty. I like full size showers. Yep. But like you make me want to like have an Airstream and like take a bunch of hipster photos.
They are so cool. This one's brand new. So like there's a lot of people that buy them from the 60s and 70s and redo them. We just bought ours brand new just because of like the technology now that's in them. I'm not interested in having something that doesn't have technology, but it looks cool. So ours is brand new. And I honestly, like our mattress is a Tempur-Pedic mattress. It's a $4,000 mattress in this thing.
Yeah.
It's more comfortable than any hotel, anything you could ever be in. And I don't like camping either.
Yeah, I don't like it.
It's the worst, but I'm not really camping. I'm like Lake Tahoe is like right here. And so we are hanging out for a couple of days, like right here. And this is my spot. We shower, hot water. We have a kitchen in there. We eat like wherever we want. And it's just our little mobile office. It's amazing.
Okay. So then like, what do you do for fun? Right. So you're like, okay, so you're there and then like the thing is in the middle of the street and then you just like walk to the lake.
Yeah.
Like, how would I enjoy? I'm trying to like convince myself that I need an Airstream, like, but how would I enjoy myself? So for me, it's like, how would I drink my White Claws while like Airstreaming? Like, do I?
Good. Hold on. Let me give you 3-second little tour. So this is a Globetrotter. I've got 2 air conditioning units and a satellite on the top. Can you see that? Okay. Yeah. Everything's electronic.
Okay.
It's all like metal and riveted. It's super cool. And so here's my little kitchen.
Fun.
So cute little kitchen,
that is
right?
So cute.
Gives us little countertops so we can open and close that.
Oh my God.
Then boom, we got a fridge in here.
Nice.
Full size fridge. So cool. And then we've got full size shower, full size bathroom, and then there's the master bedroom. So
that's rad.
It's super cool. It's like I hate camping. But there's really nothing more than like what's worse right now is if you're traveling, everybody's in this COVID scare. So like, even when you stay at hotels, it's like, you got to wear a mask everywhere you're going.
Yeah.
And so we just take our house everywhere. So I was just in Malibu we were going to do an event with you, which I'm sad that whole thing got, snafu'd.
I know.
But I hung out with Jamil in Malibu. I was literally on the beach with this thing for 5 days. And so we just walk out, get in the beach, come back in, shower inside of the Airstream. We have internet, we have satellite, we have like it's air conditioned. Like it's so freaking nice.
Yeah. Okay. So that's cool. So you can like take it to some sweet locations.
Oh yeah.
And then it's like you're staying in this sweet location. Like that's cool.
It's like a Ritz-Carlton on wheels. It's like I can go everywhere. Like my sheets are my sheets, my mattress is my mattress, my pillow's my pillow. Like cool. I don't have to like take the stuff out of my car and go into the hotel and then like deal with whether the hotel is clean or not and like tipping everybody and paying all this stuff. So like the Airstream, I don't have to pay to stay anywhere.
That's cool. All right.
Yeah, it's so dope. So you spend all your money. Like we just got off the Lake Tahoe. We were on a boat. We went through like Emerald Bay. And that's why I was a couple minutes late. I was literally jumping off the boat and then getting on this. And then tomorrow I'm golfing on the lake. We're going up the gondola tomorrow and we're going to go up to like the snow-capped mountains. And it's like, cool. Hold on, my team's locking up deals. My team is fixing and flipping. I'm building my portfolio and I'm doing all this stuff at Lake Tahoe.
Yeah.
I haven't been home in a month. I've been gone for a month. Have you ever been away from your house for a month?
No, I never have, but I've got 2 kids and I don't have an Airstream. So no.
An Airstream.
I will see virtual Sub2. I always say, so my tagline is live anywhere, invest where you want. So for the vagabonds of the world, you can go virtual in my business. My disposition strategy is wholesaling. But you can do virtual house flipping. You can develop houses virtually. You can do Airbnb, and you can also build a rental portfolio utilizing creative financing. So that was actually a strategy that I want to get more into because I'm seeing that it is actually harder to get loans right now due to COVID. I spoke to lenders and I sent you a text. I said, I total screw the bank. Like it is very difficult to get rental loans right now. They're not giving them out because
and they're asking for like 35% down and 40% down. And you're like, really?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, because a lot of these are portfolio loans, which are commercial products. Wall Street's not betting on rentals right now. And so, yeah, so what do you do when someone like, us that we want to build a rental portfolio? I was like, well, we'll have to screw the bank and go creative. And so you were the first person. I'm like, I'm going to send a text here to Pace. Like, I might need to think about getting into this course, like, because I want to learn more and get better at this. Again, it's the seller. For me, it's the seller conversations. The other stuff, the nuts and bolts, figure it out, but like, figure it out as you go. Right. Like, but it's the conversations that I'm like, what do you say to the seller? Like, how do you answer that in a way that makes sense to them? And you don't talk them out of the deal by the way you answered it, because it's easy to do that. It's easy to do that with creative finances, actually talk the seller out of doing it.
Yeah. I call it the machine gun effect versus the sniper. So what I teach my students is I'm like, I'd rather be a sniper because like, if I'm going to go to war and I only have a certain amount of bullets, I only want to use one bullet at a time, like as necessary. Right. But what creative financing can do is you can go, okay, there's this performance deed and there's this and there's that. And the seller's like, what are you talking about? Like this is funny because I'll call my student sellers because they'll go, hey, I'm having a hard time with the seller. And I'm like, okay, there's only 3 reasons why a seller wouldn't sell to you on creative finance. And here's those 3 reasons. Number 1, they're confused. You gave them too much information too fast and you tried to explain it to them like you were a scientist. Number 2, they need cash right now. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, which is then you do a wholesale, right? Then the 3rd reason is because they have literally no pain. But that's the same reason with wholesale and other stuff. So if my sellers have pain, just a little bit, I can extract that pain super easily and figure that out. And then I can solve it way faster utilizing creative finance. So one of my students calls me up. He says, man, the seller is like, I know they have the pain. I know they want to move forward, but they're absolutely hands down not interested in creative finance. And I go, you confuse the seller. Yeah. You confuse the seller. That's all there is to it. And I go, let me get on the phone with your seller. So this is like 2 months ago. I recorded the conversation, by the way. So I'd be happy to give that to your students or even give it to you or whatever, if you want to use it for like a bonus for your students and stuff like that. The sellers go, I get on the phone with the seller. 45 minutes later, I'm like, I closed the deal in 12 minutes, but we were on the phone for another 30 minutes beyond that because now the seller was convinced he wanted to work for me, right? He's like, oh my gosh, that's what you guys are doing? This is amazing. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So my student, in the first 3 minutes of talking to the seller, brings up the word deed in lieu of foreclosure. Yeah. I'm like, I've bought hundreds of homes subject to and seller finance, and I've never brought the word up unless I need to. Like, it's a sniper. I'm a sniper. I use the bullet when I need to. I'm not a machine gunnist, and I'm just blasting my bullets everywhere I possibly can. So yes, the seller conversations are like highly, highly beneficial. And I love doing them. And there's other coaches that will call me. I had a coach about a month ago calls me up. He's like, dude, you're calling your student sellers? And I go, oh yeah, like maybe 10 to 12 hours a week I spend calling my student sellers on like these big Zooms where I have 100 to 200 of my students watching me call these sellers live. He's like, you need to stop doing that. That's going overboard. I go, why do you say that? He goes, because I had a student that called to like sign up for my program, and I told him the price of my program, and he says, oh, well, for the price of your program, I'd rather just save my money and sign up for Pace's program because he'll call my sellers for me. And I'm like, well, why is that a problem? The guy goes, because you're like making all these other coaches have to step up their game and call these sellers. I'm like, oh man, I don't know what to do about that. I just truly love doing it. It's not part of my mentorship. I truly just do it as a bonus because I love doing it. So yeah. I'll give you some recordings if any.
Yeah, I would love to listen. I would love to get some recordings from you. I mean, I think that would be fascinating. So I love it. Well,
you're awesome.
This was fun. You need to get back to the lake. I really appreciate having you, on this. We are going to put this on the Wholesaling podcast. So if anybody missed it, they will hopefully hear it there. But it was so fun going live with you. And hopefully when COVID lifts and everything goes back to normal, we can do our coastal collaboration here in Newport Beach with us. That would be so fun. I was so bummed that we had to cancel it.
Can I say one last thing in closing? I love everybody on wholesaling. It's amazing. Tom Kroll, is there a better human being on this planet?
I know. He's the
Oh
best.
my gosh, he's
the best.
unbelievable. And then Brent Daniels has been one of the most helpful, beneficial people in my life. And then I
Same.
met you a couple months ago, and I'm like, yo, this girl is so amazing. And it was cool. Like when we were at Jamil's house, what was that, 6-7 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And I was just like, it's so fun to hang out with other practitioners of this business and people who aren't just teaching, but people who are practicing what they preach.
Right.
And it's been an absolute joy getting to know you.
Oh, thank you. No, I know you've given, I mean, so much value just getting to know you. You've taught me a lot. And I'm so glad that we connected, and it was like in one night, we're like, we're going to throw a happy hour. Like you are flying to California and we're doing it. We had this whole fun thing planned. And I mean, you're exactly you're my pace, literally pace. You work at my pace of like,
go.
Yeah. Just go. I mean, we were just like having a conversation and then we're like, wait, we should throw a party together.
I had a couple of people upset that thing got canceled. Like
I know.
very upset.
Me too. I was so sad. I mean, we have to do it. I mean, it's going to happen once we can like safely do it.
Right.
But anyway, Pace, you guys now, I know that a lot of this audience is Paces because we did put it on both of our feeds. So for those who don't know me, I'm Lauren Hardy. If you guys want to follow me on Instagram, my handle is This Mom Flips. Lauren Hardy on Facebook. And if you guys are interested in virtual real estate investing, virtual wholesaling, I've got a course with Wholesaling Inc. I coach with them. It's virtualinvestingmastery.com. And Pace, where are you on the socials? How can people find you?
Just follow me on Instagram. I'm like constantly I'm like the Gary V of wholesale. I am annoyingly consistent on Instagram that if you are following me, you have either muted me at this point or you truly do like what I put out there. So follow me on Instagram, Pace Morby.
Awesome. All right, guys.
Have a good night, Lauren. Thank you so much.
Thanks. You too. Bye.